Welcome, welcome, deeply curious listeners, to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a really fundamental quest that touches all our lives. The relentless pursuit of discipline and control. We all strive for it, right? We want to master our actions, our reactions, our very thoughts. But here's the unsettling question, the one we're tackling today. What if our best efforts, our sheer willpower, are actually built on shaky ground? What if true self-mastery requires a far deeper understanding than just, a new to-do list or a motivational mantra? What if we're trying to construct this magnificent skyscraper on quicksand, completely unaware of the unstable foundation beneath?
That's precisely our mission today. It's a big one. We're going to architect what we're calling a two-tiered fortress of self-mastery. And this isn't merely about managing your thoughts or consciously deciding, okay, I'm going to be more disciplined now. It's about understanding and, crucially, actively engaging with the very neurophysics that generate those thoughts and feelings in the first place. And when we say neurophysics, we mean the actual biological, physical processes. The neurons firing, the chemical reactions, the whole electrical and chemical symphony inside your brain and body. That underpins literally all your mental experiences.
Wow, okay. So neurophysics. We're going deep under the hood.
We are. We're aiming for nothing less than a unified theory of self-mastery. We're exploring how your internal hardware, your body, with its complex physiological systems, and your intricate software, your mind, with its philosophies, biases, and habits, how they interact, influence each other, and ultimately integrate. The goal is to create a truly resilient and empowered self.
That's right. Think of it like this, maybe. You have your own personal operating system running inside you. Most of us, myself included sometimes, spend all our time trying to debug the software, maybe install a new productivity app, right? But what if the real problem is deeper? What if the hardware itself is, running hot? Or what if it has these deeply ingrained, often invisible default settings that constantly interfere with whatever software you try to run?
That's a perfect analogy. We're not just doing a software update today.
No, we're diving into both the physical hardware and the mental software. And most importantly, how they integrate, how they talk to each other to create a system that's truly resilient. And our sources for this deep dive, they're as robust as the fortress we're hoping to build. We're pulling insights from the timeless wisdom of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, that's a cornerstone, but also modern psychological and neurobiological research, especially Bessel van der Kolk's work in The Body Keeps the Score, which is just fundamental here. We're looking at behavioral economics too, from books like Persuasion and Nudge. Strategic thinking from Anti-Fragile and Thinking in Systems, and even your practical approaches to human interaction from How to Win Friends and Influence People, negotiation tactics from Never Split the Difference, and insights into that creative struggle, that resistance from Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. It's quite a stack.
It is a rich tapestry, yeah. And we're here to help you navigate it. And this deep dive, really, it's for anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by life's demands, struggled with consistency, keeping those resolutions, or found their conscious intentions just mysteriously derailed by forces they don't quite understand.
That feeling of, why do I keep doing that when I know better?
Exactly that. Or feeling that inexplicable internal pull away from your true objectives, maybe right when you're close to achieving them. If that sounds familiar, then this is for you. You're going to gain not just abstract knowledge, but practical, actionable insights. Insights to understand and, more importantly, to fortify your inner world. Creating a system that works with you, not against you.
Yeah.
We're moving beyond that superficial idea of discipline.
Right, beyond just willpower.
To deep systemic control, real self-mastery.
All right, let's lay the groundwork for this inner fortress then. Let's get into phase one, architecting the two-tiered fortress blueprint. And just like any good construction project, we have to start with the very ground beneath us, understanding the literal bedrock of our being. So our goal here in this first part is to really grasp and maybe even begin to master the neural and physiological systems that form the absolute bedrock of our thoughts and emotions. We're essentially looking at the hardware manual for our bodies. Understanding the engine room, you could say, this isn't just about feeling good physically, though that's important. It's about recognizing that our body's state is the fundamental operating condition for our mind.
Absolutely fundamental. And what's crucial to understand right off the bat is that these primal foundations aren't just passive. They're not just sitting there. They're actively dictating so much of our experience, often way below the level of conscious awareness. They are the pre-installed programs, the default settings that run constantly, influencing everything from our mood swings to our big life decisions.
Okay, let's really unpack this first key concept then. This idea that many of our reactions to the world They aren't conscious, deliberate decisions we make. They're not, carefully considered choices from our thinking mind. Instead, they're these deeply ingrained physiological programs, almost like, as you said, pre-installed software running silently in the background. Like our body, our nervous system, is constantly running code that often bypasses our conscious awareness. It's making decisions for us before our conscious mind even gets a look in.
Exactly. And this is where Bessel van der Kolk's incredible work in The Body Keeps the Score becomes absolutely central to understanding these primal foundations. It's a game changer. He meticulously details how trauma and even just chronic stress isn't simply stored as memories in the brain like files in a flatter. It's literally embodied. It gets baked into the default settings of our nervous system.
Embodied. That's a powerful word.
It is. Our bodies, in essence, remember and react to past threats as if they are happening right now. So, for example, those classic responses like fight or flight or even freeze, which van der Kolk talks about a lot and is often overlooked, they aren't conscious decisions we make in the moment. They are deep, ancient physiological programs hardwired for survival. When these systems get triggered, a whole cocktail of chemicals, as the charisma myth also touches on, floods the body. We're talking adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine.
The stress hormones.
Powerful neurochemicals that prepare your body for immediate, drastic action. And the trigger could be a real threat or an imagined one, a tiger in the past, or maybe just a harsh email today. Your sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive, and your body is, for all intents and purposes, hijacked by this primal program.
So it's not just a feeling of panic in your head. It's a literal, physical, biochemical cascade that takes over the whole system, and it's running on autopilot. Wow.
Completely autopilot. That's a huge insight because it means, as you implied, we often can't just think our way out of it with logic alone. The body has already reacted. Van der Kolk highlights that these responses often stem from specific brain mechanisms, like an overactive limbic system, particularly the amygdala. The amygdala is like our brain's smoke detector or alarm system.
Always scanning for danger.
Constantly. And when it senses danger real or perceived, it can initiate what's often called an amygdala hijack. It overrides the rational prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain. This sudden shift pushes your nervous system right out of its window of tolerance.
The window of tolerance. Can you explain that a bit more? That sounds key.
It's a crucial concept from van der Kolk. The window of tolerance is basically the optimal zone of arousal where we can function effectively. It's where we can handle stress, adapt, learn, connect with others, regulate our emotions. We feel capable and calm, mostly. But outside this window, we become either hyper-aroused, that's the fight or flight state, feeling anxious, overwhelmed, maybe angry, or we become hypo-aroused, that's the freeze or collapse state, feeling numb, disconnected, shut down, foggy. And in either of those states, our ability to think clearly, connect socially, or even just feel safe is severely compromised. The hardware is offline, essentially.
And it's not just about big T traumas, right? Everyday chronic stress, the constant pressure cooker many of us live in, can shrink that window, make us more prone to flying out of it.
Absolutely, it chips away at it. Think of it like a computer running a super high alert security program all the time. Even small inputs, minor stresses, can trigger an overreaction because the system is already primed for threat. It's exhausted its reserves. And what's truly fascinating, tying back to the charisma myth as well, is how our physical state dictates our mental capacity. That book notes your internal, emotional, and mental state determines your body language. It's clearly a two-way street, though. Your internal state is expressed physically, sure, but you can also actively influence your body's chemistry to shift that state.
How so?
Well, the brain's well-documented inability to distinguish imagination from reality is key here. It means you can proactively alter that cocktail of chemicals. Recalling a moment of genuine confidence or triumph, for example, isn't just a nice mental exercise. It can biochemically alter your state, shifting you away from cortisol and towards a more empowering mix, maybe dopamine, oxytocin. It literally prepares your body for a different kind of engagement, physically.
And a really powerful illustration of this mind-body connection, which the charisma myth also mentions, is the placebo effect, isn't it? Patients showing real, measurable medical improvement from totally inert treatments, sugar pills basically, simply because their mind, through expectation and belief, somehow affects their body.
Precisely. That's the non-conscious physiological impact of expectation and belief right there in action. It powerfully demonstrates how deeply our beliefs, our mental state, can influence our physical reality, our hardware. It's a testament to how the mind, even operating unconsciously, acts as a potent controller of our physiological hardware, for better or sometimes for worse. So if we connect this idea of embodied responses to the bigger picture, our physical environment, the spaces we inhabit, and even really subtle cues within those spaces, they profoundly shape our unconscious responses. These environmental factors then become part of our default settings, influencing our behavior, our mood, our physiological state, often completely without our conscious awareness. They act directly on those primal foundations.
That really resonates with George Lakoff and Mark Johnson's work in Metaphors We Live By. They show us how deeply embodied our conceptual systems are, how our understanding of abstract ideas is grounded in physical experience. For instance, spatial orientations like happy is up or sad is down. They aren't just arbitrary linguistic quirks. They argue these have a real basis in the way we have bodies of the sort we have and that they function as they do in our physical environment.
Our posture, our energy levels.
Exactly. Our very language, our metaphors, our fundamental ways of thinking are rooted in our physical experience of the world. So it makes sense that a cluttered, disorganized physical environment can actually feel heavy, overwhelming, contributing to a stressed physiological state. While an open, clean, well-lit space can physically feel more liberating, calming the nervous system.
And Robert Cialdini's Persuasion provides some frankly startling examples of this, right? With these privileged moments and focal elements, these subtle, often overlooked cues in our environment that prime us for certain responses before we even consciously engage with a decision or request. Compelling examples, absolutely. Take that study he describes with the fundraisers. Before making their calls, some were just incidentally exposed to a photo of a runner winning a race, just for a few seconds. Nothing else changed. That simple, incidental visual cue boosted their money-raising success by a staggering 60% by the end of their shift.
60%?
Yeah.
That's incredible, just from a picture.
Incredible, right? And it wasn't about conscious inspiration, oh, I should try harder like that runner. Cialdini argues it suggests that this initial, almost subliminal exposure to simple words or images can have a powerful persuasive impact on later actions. It operates below conscious awareness. It's like a subtle preconfiguration of your mental and even physiological state, influenced entirely by the environment, subtly shifting your neurochemistry towards, in that case, a winning, persistent mindset.
So our physical surroundings and the things we just happen to focus on, even unconsciously, can literally prime us for certain behaviors. They affect our physiological readiness. That's a huge lever we might not even realize we have or that's being pulled on us.
Exactly. And this ties directly into Daniel Kahneman's research, which is discussed extensively in Persuasion, but also foundational to nudge, particularly the focusing illusion. This cognitive bias demonstrates that things are often perceived as more important simply when they capture our attention. Whatever we focus on looms larger in our minds.
So what grabs our attention gets undue weight.
Precisely. And this isn't just a mental trick. It's about how our sensory apparatus, our body's perception and processing system, the hardware, prioritizes information. What we focus on, often unintentionally or just because it's prominent or novel in our environment, gains this exaggerated importance. This can lead us to perceive causality where maybe it doesn't genuinely exist, or to overemphasize certain aspects of a situation, making us much more susceptible to other biases later on. It's a direct example of how the hardware of our perception, what our senses pick up and how our brain prioritizes it, can direct and even distort what our mental software focuses on and how it assesses reality.
Okay, so putting all this together, what does it all mean for our hardware, for our primal foundations? It really implies that the state of our nervous system, our overall physiological well-being, our window of tolerance, it isn't just some background detail we can ignore until we get sick. It's the absolute fundamental operating condition for everything else. Our thinking, our emotions, our ability to learn, to connect, to maintain discipline. If the hardware is unstable, chronically stressed, stuck outside that window, then everything built on top of it becomes unstable too. This is really about building true physiological resilience, isn't it? Maybe even going beyond just bouncing back.
Indeed. And this is where Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragile becomes really relevant, even if we're applying it slightly differently. Taleb introduces the idea that some systems aren't just resilient, resisting shocks and staying the same, or robust, withstanding shocks, but actually anti-fragile. They gain from disorder, stress, and volatility up to a point.
They get stronger from stress.
Exactly. While Taleb might apply this more to complex systems like economies or biological evolution, he notes an organism can be inherently weak, but its genetic code, the information, can be anti-fragile through adaptation over generations. We can analogously consider our body's baseline state and how it adapts within our lifetime. If we embrace this idea of anti-fragility, that certain stressors can actually make us stronger, we can apply it directly to managing our primal foundations. This isn't just about being resilient, just bouncing back to normal after a stressful event. It's about designing our lives, and specifically our physiological routines, so that smaller, controlled stresses actually strengthen our nervous system.
Okay, like what kind of stresses?
Things like strategic, intense exercise followed by recovery. Deliberate, short exposure to cold, like a cold shower. Even challenging but manageable cognitive tasks or learning new skills. These act as beneficial stressors, or eustress, that challenge the system just enough to provoke adaptation, making us more robust and adaptive for future, larger, unexpected demands. It trains our window of tolerance to widen.
That's a really fascinating reframe. So it's not about avoiding all stress, but deliberately, strategically using certain types of stress to become stronger, more capable.
Precisely. This proactive approach helps prevent the kind of systemic delays and instability that Donella Meadows warns us about in Thinking in Systems. That book is brilliant on this. Meadows teaches us that delays determine how fast systems can react, how accurately they hit their targets, and how timely is the information passed around a system. Delays are critical. And crucially, she states that overshoots, oscillations, and collapses are always caused by delays in feedback loops.
Overshoots, oscillations, collapses. That sounds like burnout. Mood swings, making bad decisions under pressure.
Exactly. It applies powerfully to our internal physiological systems. Chronic stress or unresolved trauma, for instance, create systemic delays in nervous system processing and recovery. This makes the system less resilient, more prone to overreactions, overshoots, wild swings in mood or energy oscillations, and ultimately systemic crashes like burnout or illness collapses. Building anti-fragility into our physiological routines helps our internal systems react more quickly and appropriately, reducing those damaging delays and improving our capacity to stay within our window of tolerance, as van der Kolk would put it.
So if your body is like this finely tuned machine, these physiological defaults from our past, the constant input from our environment, and crucially how we strategically respond to stress, they're constantly affecting its calibration, its resilience. If it's out of whack, running too hot or too cold, outside that window, your ability to perform complex tasks, manage emotions, or even just maintain basic calm is severely compromised. This is truly about building physiological resilience from the ground up. It's the essential first tier of our fortress. Okay, now that we've really established the importance, the primacy even, of the primal foundations, our body's hardware, its default settings, its operating conditions, it's time to construct the second tier, the conscious citadel. This is where we build the software, the philosophies, the mental models, the structured behaviors, the conscious strategies that operate atop our physiological hardware. This is about consciously designing our internal programs to achieve that self-mastery we're aiming for.
Exactly. We're looking at how we can develop the mental tools and frameworks that allow us to process information effectively, make rational decisions, and steer our actions with intention. Even when, and perhaps especially when, our underlying physiological systems, those primal foundations, might be sending us chaotic or dysregulated signals from below. This tier is all about developing a robust, reliable mental architecture.
Okay, let's dive into the first key component of this mental software. If the body is our hardware, then Stoicism, particularly as laid out by Marcus Aurelius in his personal journal, Meditations, provides a remarkably robust philosophical operating system for our minds. It feels like a foundational set of principles to guide our mental processing, helping us interpret the world and, importantly, our own reactions to it. But, for some people, Stoicism might seem a bit cold, detached, especially when compared to the raw, instinctual, sometimes overwhelming responses we were just discussing in our primal foundations. How does someone like Aurelius, writing almost 2,000 years ago, actually help us bridge that gap between a sudden, gut-wrenching physiological reaction and a conscious, rational choice?
That's a really crucial question, and it gets right to the heart of why Stoicism is so relevant here. It's precisely where its practical power lies. What's truly fascinating about Stoicism, especially Aurelius' version, is how it offers a logical, consistent, and remarkably stable framework for dealing with the often chaotic, seemingly irrational outputs of our primal foundations, those automatic physiological responses we just can't help. Aurelius places enormous emphasis on what he calls the faculty which produces opinion, our inner judgment, our interpretation. He states quite profoundly, "On this faculty it entirely depends whether there shall exist in thy ruling part any opinion inconsistent with nature and the constitution of the rational animal."
So it all hinges on our interpretation, our opinion of events.
In the Stoic view, yes, this empowers us. It means we have the capacity to choose our interpretation, to reframe our experience. We can choose how we perceive an event, rather than being completely enslaved by our initial physiological shock or emotional surge, which, as we've established, are often just automatic hardware reactions that happen to us. They aren't us. Stoicism helps us create that vital space between the stimulus and our considered response.
Okay, so it's about consciously taking control of that interpretation step. It's about deliberately running the right mental software, the right program, even when our body's hardware is screaming something completely different based on its old programming.
Precisely. And the core Stoic principles provide very clear guidance on how to do this. First, and maybe most famously, is controlling opinion. Aurelius says, "Take away thy opinion," and then there's "taken away the complaint, I have been harmed. Take away the complaint, I have been harmed," and the harm is taken away. This directly addresses how we mentally process external events. It helps us realize that much of our suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from our judgments about them. It's a powerful reframing tool, especially useful when that initial physiological shock hits.
Right, separating the event from the story we tell ourselves about the event.
Exactly. Second, there's the crucial focus on what's actually in your power. The famous dichotomy of control. He instructs himself and us, "In thy power to live free from all compulsion in the greatest tranquility of mind, even if all the world cry out against thee." This highlights mental resilience. It teaches us to clearly separate external events, which are very often outside our control, from our internal response, our judgments, our choices, our actions, which Stoics argue are always within our control. This distinction is absolutely vital when our primal foundations are agitated by things we simply cannot change.
That seems incredibly practical for dealing with stress and uncertainty.
It is. And third, there's the principle of living according to nature and reason. Aurelius constantly urges himself to say and do everything in conformity with the soundest reason and to live according to nature, meaning our nature as rational social beings, the remainder which is allowed thee. This is about aligning our conscious actions and thoughts with a rational, ethical framework. It's about acting with virtue, justice, courage, temperance, wisdom, even when our body screams fear or anger or desire. It brings coherence and integrity to our inner world, building a consistent, principled response system, our operating system.
Okay, so if Stoicism provides our clever philosophical OS, then understanding cognitive biases feels like installing a really powerful, constantly updated antivirus system for that OS. Because many of our software errors, our mistakes in judgment and decision-making, aren't just random slips or poor logic. They are systematic, predictable deviations from rationality that can deeply and often negatively affect our lives. We're all running these buggy background programs, aren't we?
We absolutely are, and this raises a really important question, linking back to our two tiers. How are these cognitive biases not just simple programming errors in our mental software, but often actually symptoms of unstable primal foundations? Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize-winning work, brilliantly synthesized in Thinking, Fast and Slow, and also referenced in Nudge, describes these biases as mental shortcuts, or heuristics. Our brain takes these shortcuts, especially when under cognitive load, time pressure, or emotional stress. They're efficient most of the time, but they lead to predictable errors.
Right, the fast-thinking system 1 overriding the slower, more deliberate system 2.
Exactly. And Nudge, drawing on Kahneman, describes that focusing illusion again. Things are often perceived as more important when they capture our attention. Now, connect this to our primal foundations. When our body is in a state of stress or dysregulation outside van der Kolk's window of tolerance, what naturally captures our attention?
Sweats, dangers, potential losses, things that feel urgent.
Precisely. Our attention narrows, drawn to potential threats or losses. This makes us far more susceptible to certain biases. Our hardware, our stressed physiological state, is literally making our software glitch more often and more predictably.
So it's like the body's alarm system, that primal fight-or-flight readiness, is overriding the rational software, making us more likely to jump to conclusions, see danger where there isn't any, or maybe just cling desperately to the status quo because change feels threatening.
That's a great way to put it. And Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, while it's a book about high-stakes negotiation, is fantastic at detailing several relevant biases that clearly demonstrate this interplay between our primal state and our cognitive errors. For example, the framing effect. We respond totally differently to the same choice depending on how it's presented or framed. If a situation is framed as a potential loss, our primal fear response kicks in much harder, often leading to irrational risk-taking to avoid that loss, even if the potential gain from another frame is identical. Then there's prospect theory, which Kahneman also developed. It explains why we tend to take unwarranted risks when facing uncertain losses, but become overly cautious, risk-averse, when facing potential gains of the same magnitude. When our nervous system is already shaky, our perception of loss is magnified, making this bias even stronger.
So we gamble recklessly to avoid losing, but play it too safe when we could be winning.
Often, yes. And perhaps the most powerful and pervasive bias Voss leverages is loss aversion. Psychologically, losses loom much larger than equivalent gains. People will work much harder, take more risks to avoid losing $100 than they will to gain $100. These biases aren't just intellectual curiosities. They kick in with force precisely when our primal foundations are unstable or aroused by stress, fear, or even strong positive emotion. They make us less rational, more reactive. The analogy holds perfectly. If your computer is overheating, if your physiological hardware is unstable and outside its optimal operating range, the software is much more prone to crashing, freezing, and making errors. These manifest as predictable cognitive biases, causing us to act against our own best interests, sometimes repeatedly. Installing that antivirus means becoming aware of these tendencies, especially when stressed.
Okay, now let's talk about maybe the most frustrating piece of internal software for many people, that internal enemy program. What Steven Pressfield, in his classic The War of Art, calls resistance with a capital R. It's that force of self-sabotage that stops us dead in our tracks. It makes us procrastinate on the things that matter most. It makes us pull back just as we're nearing a breakthrough, or talk ourselves out of our most important creative work or life changes. It feels like an invisible wall.
Pressfield's concept of resistance is such a powerful and relatable way to label this phenomenon. It perfectly illustrates this internal battle. He describes it as this insidious, intelligent, impersonal, and omnipresent force. It manifests as procrastination, sure, but also as crippling self-doubt, fear, rationalization, distraction, literally anything that prevents us from doing our true work, especially creative work, entrepreneurial ventures, or acts of self-improvement. Now, what's absolutely critical here, connecting it back to our fortress model, is how this resistance, this program of self-sabotage, often feeds voraciously on the chaotic energy stemming from an unregulated nervous system.
So the unstable hardware fuels the enemy software.
It absolutely does. Resistance thrives in chaos and fear. It's like a subconscious program running in the background, amplifying our deepest fears and insecurities, making them seem rational and insurmountable. Olivia Fox Cabane, in The Charisma Myth, implicitly describes the antidote to this internal state. By learning techniques to quiet your body's threat response, by regaining that physiological regulation within your window of tolerance, you can actively recall moments of absolute triumph and confidence. And remember, this isn't just feeling good mentally. It physically changes your body language and internal state, shifting that cocktail of chemicals away from cortisol and fear towards confidence and presence. It starves resistance of its fuel. That inner ghost scenario we mentioned earlier, where someone consistently self-sabotages just as they approach victory, perfectly illustrates an internal program, resistance, running completely contrary to conscious goals. And it's often driven by those deeper, unexamined fears or insecurities bubbling up from dysregulated primal foundations.
So it's not just a simple lack of willpower or discipline when we fail to follow through. It could be this embedded bug, this resistance program in our personal operating system. Maybe a kind of self-protection mechanism gone haywire that trips us up right when we're about to succeed, because success itself feels threatening on some deep level.
That's a very insightful way to frame it. It often is a misguided protection mechanism. On a broader scale, you can see parallels in the concept of inertia that Richard Brumelt discusses in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Organizations, he notes, are often unwilling or unable to adapt, even when the need for change is blindingly obvious, because existing structures, routines, and mindsets create this massive internal drag. On a personal level, this translates directly to that internal drag, that psychological friction Pressfield calls resistance, that prevents coherent, aligned action towards our goals. Yuval Noah Harari, in *Sapiens*, touches on a related idea. Humans seem wired to be never satisfied, always pursuing more, always striving. This perpetual drive, which perhaps conferred an evolutionary advantage historically, can paradoxically fuel resistance today. We might sabotage this success because deep down, a part of our operating system is programmed to always seek more or different, making us uncomfortable with completion or contentment. It undermines the current success.
Like an operating system that constantly demands an upgrade even when the current version is working perfectly.
Exactly like that. This inner ghost can absolutely be a manifestation of an unmanaged need for novelty, or perhaps a deep-seated fear of the new responsibilities, the visibility, or the expectations that come with achieving a significant goal. It leads us to derail our own progress out of a profound discomfort with stability or success itself. Resistance finds the weak spot.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and hopefully practical for people. How can we use habits, those consistent, often small actions, not just to build better behaviors on the surface, but to actively reprogram those deeper physiological responses in our primal foundations? This isn't just about repetition, is it? It sounds more like deeply embedding new supportive code that literally helps rewire our entire system, hardware and software working together.
Yes, that's precisely the potential. Positive habits are absolutely crucial for stabilizing both tiers of our inner fortress. They are the mortar between the bricks. They represent the consistent, deliberate actions that gradually, over time, recalibrate our hardware, our nervous system's baseline, and simultaneously reinforce our desired software, our mindset, our beliefs, our skills. Brian Tracy, in The Psychology of Selling, emphasizes this principle in a sales context, showing how simple goal setting made the difference for salespeople whose sales exploded. It wasn't magic, it was the structure and consistency of the habit of setting and reviewing goals that led to predictable success. And from Cialdini's Persuasion, we also understand the immense psychological power of the principle of consistency. People have a deep-seated need to act in a way that is consistent with their prior commitments, statements, and self-image.
So we can leverage that internal drive for consistency to build better habits.
Absolutely. This applies not only to how we interact with others, but critically, how we build internal consistency within ourselves. We can create a powerful, virtuous feedback loop. This involves actively making people glad to do what you want, as Dale Carnegie famously advised on how to win friends and influence people. And importantly, this applies even to negotiating with yourself. By framing actions positively, celebrating small wins, and making small, manageable commitments to yourself, you engage that powerful internal drive for consistency. Cialdini, in the Post-Suasion After Effects chapter of Persuasion, discusses research showing how an initial affirmative response, just getting someone or yourself to say yes to something small, leads to persistent behavior changes. And crucially, how that initial commitment becomes part of their identity, reinforcing their future behaviors. This is literally reprogramming at the identity level.
Wow. So when you consistently act in line with a desired identity, say, I am a person who exercises regularly, or I am a calm and focused leader, you're not just faking it till you make it. You're actually reinforcing both the mental software, your beliefs, your self-concept, and the underlying physiological hardware, your nervous system's capacity for regulation and follow-through that supports that identity.
Exactly. You are rewiring. Small, consistent actions, like those advocated in James Clear's Atomic Habits, though not one of our core texts today, the principle is universal and fits perfectly here, build strong, stable walls for your fortress. These tiny habits, practiced consistently, literally rewire neural pathways over time. They automate positive behaviors, reducing the need for constant willpower, which is easily depleted, and crucially, they help stabilize your nervous system, gradually expanding your window of tolerance by proving to your body repeatedly that you can handle challenges and follow through. It's hardware and software reinforcement simultaneously.
Okay, this is fantastic. We've mapped out our primal foundations, the body, as hardware, its neurophysics, its programmed responses, especially through the lens of Van der Kolk. And we've explored our conscious citadel, the mind, as software, with stoicism as an OS, understanding biases like an antivirus, tackling resistance, and using habits as a building tool. But the real power, the true key to unlocking self-mastery you've been saying, comes from understanding how these two tiers are integrated, how they constantly interact and influence each other. This feels like the core of the blueprint, the unified theory you mentioned, the operating system that seamlessly runs both hardware and software together.
It absolutely is the core. What's truly fascinating here, and the absolute heart of this unified theory, is recognizing how an unregulated nervous system, those primal foundations, operating outside their optimal window of tolerance, creates the perfect breeding ground for the proliferation of cognitive biases. Those conscious citadel software errors we talked about. This underlying physiological instability also dramatically increases the power and grip of Pressfield's resistance, that force of self-sabotage, and consequently it makes committing to and sustaining positive habits, the very things that could help stabilize the system, feel nearly impossible. They are not separate systems operating in isolation. They are deeply, inextricably intertwined, each profoundly influencing the other in a continuous dynamic feedback loop.
So it's not just that one affects the other in a linear way. It sounds more like a vicious cycle, maybe, where problems in the hardware don't just make the software glitch more, but actively create the conditions for those glitches, and vice versa.
It absolutely is a cycle, often a vicious one. Let's break down this cycle of instability to see exactly how they feed into each other, keeping people stuck. Step 1. Physiological disruption. Primal foundations. It often starts here. Your body is in a state of chronic stress, anxiety, or a heightened threat response, maybe due to past trauma, current pressures, or even poor physical habits. As Van Kolk describes, your nervous system is dysregulated, frequently operating outside its optimal window of tolerance. This is like your computer hardware running way too hot with a constantly overloaded processor. Maybe the fan is screaming. Your internal alarms are blaring, even if there's no immediate objective external threat. This raw physical state directly impacts your mental capacity.
Right, hard to think clearly when your body feels like it's on fire or shutting down.
Exactly. Which leads to step 2, cognitive vulnerability, conscious citadel. This physiological chaos doesn't just stay neatly contained in the body. It primes the mind for shortcuts, distortions, and errors. That focusing illusion from nudge becomes much more pronounced because an anxious, threatened system is naturally, almost magnetically, drawn to potential threats, negative information, or perceived losses. This, in turn, dramatically amplifies biases like loss aversion and prospect theory that Voss highlights in Never Split the Difference. Your mental software is essentially running on faulty, overheated, unstable hardware. This inevitably leads to poor judgment, skewed perceptions, impulsive decisions, and an inability to see the bigger picture or engage in calm, rational, long-term planning. It's a systemic vulnerability, not just a thinking error.
And that poor judgment and distorted thinking must make it harder to act effectively.
Precisely. Leading to step 3, increased resistance, self-sabotage. This unsettled internal state, both physically agitated and mentally biased, makes it incredibly difficult to muster the energy and clarity needed for coherent action, a core concept Richard Rummel emphasizes in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Your internal energy is fragmented, scattered, not focused. That inherent human desire for a feeling of importance, which Dale Carnegie talks about in How to Win Friends, can become distorted here. Maybe procrastination gives a temporary feeling of control, or self-sabotage fulfills a hidden belief about not deserving success. Actions that appear self-sabotaging on the surface are often driven by these deeper unmanaged needs, fears, or distorted desires fueled by the underlying chaos. This internal conflict, fueled by physiological unease and cognitive distortions, manifests powerfully as Pressfield's resistance, making us actively work against our own stated goals and best interests.
And if you're feeling physically awful, thinking unclearly, and fighting internal resistance, building good habits must feel impossible.
That's step 4, habit formation failure. When the mind is plagued by biases and resistance is running rampant, consistent, positive action, the very building blocks of change and self-mastery becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible. It requires enormous willpower just to start, let alone sustain. It's exactly like trying to build a solid wall. Your new positive habits on quicksand, which is your unregulated physiology and your biased, resistant cognition. The foundation literally can't hold the structure. This leads to inconsistent effort, frustration, and eventual abandonment of goals, which then further reinforces the negative self-belief. See, I can't do it, and perpetuates the entire debilitating cycle.
Wow. Seeing it laid out like that, it really highlights how interconnected it all is and why just focusing on willpower or mindset often isn't enough.
It really isn't. And this raises that crucial point again. The true battle for self-mastery isn't just waged here, in the conscious mind. It's fought in the dynamic, moment-by-moment interaction between the mind and the body. Going back to metaphors we live by, Lakoff and Johnson discuss the weak homonymy view, suggesting concepts can be related by similarity, even if they aren't identical.
Weak hominy, like how the word bank can mean the side of a river or a place for money, related sound, different core meaning.
Sort of, yes. The idea is about overlapping conceptual structures. And here we see this deep similarity and profound interconnection between our physical states and our mental states. They aren't literally the same thing, perhaps, but they are so deeply intertwined, sharing similar underlying structural influences and constantly shaping each other. They aren't separate entities, a ghost in a machine, but rather two inseparable aspects of a single unified system. True self-mastery, the kind that lasts, absolutely acknowledges and works with this inseparable unity.
That's a really profound shift in perspective. It moves self-control beyond just mind over matter, or body over mind, to a much more sophisticated, holistic understanding of an integrated system. So the path to building this truly strong inner fortress isn't about brute forcing one tier to dominate the other. It's a dual approach, a constant balancing act maybe, a continuous dance. We need to calm the body, regulate the hardware to clear the mind and allow the software to run effectively. And we need to strengthen the mind, install better software to consciously guide the body and make better choices about how we manage our hardware. It's a holistic system where paying attention to your deepest physiological state, your window of tolerance, is just as critical as your most refined philosophical thought or strategic plan.
You've nailed it. That's the essence of the unified theory.
All right, now that we have this powerful integrated blueprint for our two-tiered fortress, it's time to put it to the test. We need to run some drills. Our goal for this phase is to apply this unified theory, this integrated approach, to some realistic high-pressure combat scenarios, challenges we all face. We need to develop integrated response protocols. We're moving from the abstract theory and blueprint to live, practical simulation. How do we actually use this in the heat of the moment?
Exactly. This is where the rubber meets the road. By understanding how the primal foundations, body hardware, and the conscious citadel mind software interact under fire, we can create much more effective, holistic responses to life's inevitable ambushes and attritional battles. This isn't just about coping, it's about preventing internal collapse and fostering proactive, resilient self-management even when things get tough.
Okay, let's imagine this scenario. It's intense. You just received absolutely devastating professional news via a phone call. Maybe a massive project you led just failed spectacularly. A key client just walked away threatening legal action. A major career setback. Crushing news. And you receive this literally minutes before you have to walk into the most important meeting or presentation of your life. Your heart is pounding like a drum. Your mind is racing uncontrollably. Pure panic is setting in. You can feel that classic amygdala hijack that van der Kolk describes, throwing you way outside your window of tolerance. You feel like you're about to fall apart. How do you respond using our two-tiered protocol?
Okay, deep breath, just thinking about it. The immediate number one, absolutely critical action must be to regain nervous system regulation. Your hardware is flashing red alerts. Your body is in a full-blown threat response. Trying to logically talk yourself down right now is likely futile because the thinking brain is partially offline. Recalling the principles from the body keeps the score, and also the charisma myth. You must first quiet down that primal automatic reaction that's throwing you out of your window of tolerance. This is achieved through specific, deliberate physiological actions, not primarily through intellectual effort at this initial stage. Hardware first in an ambush.
Right, so what are those immediate, concrete physical steps? What's maneuver one? Control the foundations.
Okay, immediate steps could include deep, controlled breathing, focusing especially on extending the exhale much longer than the inhale. This directly stimulates the vagal nerve, which is a primary component of your parasympathetic nervous system, your body's calming rest and digest system. It signals safety to the brainstem. Van der Kolk really emphasizes the power of breathwork and vagal toning for self-regulation. Simultaneously, or right after, consciously change your physical posture. Stand tall, pull your shoulders back, adopt an expansive power pose, even if it feels fake initially. Research cited in the charisma myth indicates these postures can actually shift your hormone levels within minutes, decreasing cortisol and increasing testosterone, physiologically nudging you towards confidence. Or, another powerful tool, a quick, intense visualization of a past moment of absolute triumph or peak confidence. Leverage your brain's inability to distinguish vivid imagination from reality. By viscerally recalling that feeling state, you can trigger a release of positive neurochemicals, that empowering cocktail, to counteract the panic chemicals flooding your system. The goal of Maneuver 1 is simple. Use direct physical inputs to quickly shift your internal state, influence your body's chemistry, and move you back towards, or at least closer to, your window of tolerance. You need to create a more stable foundation before you can effectively think.
Okay, so you've taken those immediate physical actions. The pounding heart is maybe slowing a bit. The racing thoughts aren't quite as overwhelming. The hardware is stabilizing. Now what? What mental program do you run? How do you activate the conscious citadel for maneuver 2? How do you make sense of this and still prepare to deliver that crucial presentation?
Right. Once there's even a little bit more physiological calm, you can bring the conscious citadel online more effectively. Now you draw directly from your Stoic operating system, from meditations. Your mental response involves immediate reframing. You deliberately reverence the faculty which produces opinion by consciously choosing not to form opinions right now that cause further self-harm or fuel the panic. This is the direct practical application of Aurelius's take away thy opinion, and then there is taken away the complaint, I have been harmed. You actively separate the external event, the bad news, from your internal interpretation and reaction to it. You acknowledge the news is bad, yes, but you affirm that your response in this present moment is within your control.
So you're not denying the reality of the bad news. That would be foolish. But you're consciously controlling your immediate reaction to it and preventing it from completely derailing your performance in the very next moment.
Precisely. You then engage in rapid, focused, rational analysis. Make for thyself a definition or description of the thing which is presented to thee, so as to see distinctly what kind of a thing it is in its substance, in its nudity, in its complete entirety, as Aurelius advises. Strip away the emotional charge for a moment. You ask yourself, what just happened? What does it actually mean right now? And most importantly, what is truly in my power in this room in the next hour? You distinguish clearly between what you can control, your presence, your preparation for this presentation, your demeanor, delivering your message calmly, and what you absolutely cannot control right now, which is the catastrophic news itself and its longer-term implications, which are already in motion outside this room. Your focus shifts entirely to acting justly and following reason in the immediate task at hand. Execute the plan for the presentation. This is also about actively combating that focusing illusion we talked about earlier, from persuasion and nudge. You consciously prevent the catastrophic news from becoming psychologically more important right now than the immediate crucial task of delivering that presentation effectively. Your mind, now calmer because the physiological intervention bought you some space, can direct its attention strategically, using Stoic wisdom as its operating system to navigate the ambush.
Okay, let's shift gears to a different kind of challenge, maybe even more common for many people. Not a sudden ambush, but slow, grinding attrition. Imagine you weeks, maybe months, into a really high-pressure project or period at work. You're operating on fumes, consistently sleep-deprived. You feel utterly exhausted, mentally and physically. You find yourself snapping at colleagues, maybe even loved ones. You're making uncharacteristic mistakes. Your focus is shot. You're deep in this cycle of attrition. Your window of tolerance feels like it's shrunk to almost nothing, and you're constantly on edge, maybe feeling hopeless. How do you break this draining pattern using the two-tiered approach?
The slow burn of chronic stress. This is incredibly common and insidious. Here, the immediate physiological action, maneuver 1, is actually one of recognition and systemic intervention. You have to recognize that prolonged, unrelenting stress is fundamentally eroding your primal foundations at a systemic level. It's pushing you into a chronic state of dysregulation, likely keeping you perpetually simmering just below boiling point, hyperarousal, or slipping into numb exhaustion, hypoarousal. Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows provides a crucial lens here. She warns powerfully against the common trap of shifting the burden to the intervener.
Shifting the burden. What does that mean in this context?
It means relying on external, often short-term fixes that only alleviate the symptoms but don't address the underlying root cause of the problem. In this case, it might be relying on excessive caffeine to power through, using alcohol or escapism to numb out at night, or just constantly pushing harder without rest. These interventions might provide temporary relief, but they allow the underlying system, your own capacity for resilience and regulation, to weaken and atrophy over time. You become dependent on the quick fix. This is exactly what happens with chronic stress if we don't intervene systemically. The constant delays in adequate rest and recovery are causing significant overshoots and oscillations in your performance, your mood, your energy levels, leading inevitably towards burnout, illness, and errors. You're accumulating a massive physiological debt.
So the first maneuver isn't just a quick fix like breathing, but a deeper recognition that the system needs intervention, not just masking the symptoms with more coffee.
Absolutely. The physiological action required here is about systemic regeneration, not just symptom management. You need to intervene at a deeper level to allow your nervous system to re-regulate and rebuild its capacity. This means implementing scheduled, mandatory periods of rest and recovery, even if they feel impossible or unproductive initially. They must become non-negotiable. Even brief, regular breaks throughout the day can make a difference. Prioritize sleep like it's your job. Attend to basic physical care, nutrition, hydration, gentle movement. Marcus Aurelius, even amidst running the Roman Empire, reminded himself, it is necessary to take rest also, and crucially, nature has fixed bounds to this too. We ignore these natural bounds at our peril. You must consciously impose these boundaries to allow your physical hardware, your nervous system, to actually recharge and stabilize. This prevents chronic stress from becoming a permanent, damaging default setting and gradually helps to widen that shrinking window of tolerance again. This might look like scheduling 2 15-minute walks outside during the workday, setting a firm lights-out time, saying no to non-essential commitments, actually taking your vacation days. It's about respecting the hardware's limits.
Okay, so maneuver 1 is about respecting the hardware and implementing systemic recovery. With the body starting to get some essential relief, how do you adjust the mental software? How do you use the conscious citadel in maneuver 2 to deal with the ongoing pressure, the backlog of work, and maybe repair some of the social friction you've inadvertently created by being irritable?
Right. With the hardware starting to stabilize, the software has a better chance. Mentally, you activate Stoic principles of acceptance and resilience. Aurelius advises, love that only which happens to thee, and is spun with the thread of thy destiny, for what is more suitable. Now, this doesn't mean passive resignation or liking the stressful situation. It means accepting the reality of the current state of pressure as part of your path right now, rather than mentally fighting it, railing against it, or constantly wishing it were different. This acceptance dramatically reduces internal friction and wasted mental energy, allowing your mind to focus on constructive action, what is within your power. Simultaneously, you need to proactively deploy strategies from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People to manage and repair the social friction. Your irritability under stress has likely damaged relationships or created tension. Consciously apply techniques like let the other person save face, try to understand their perspective even if you disagree. Make the fault seem easy to correct if you made mistakes, own them simply and focus on fixing them, don't catastrophize. And give a dog a good name. Use sincere appreciation and positive reinforcement for your colleagues' efforts, especially now. When your body is run down and you're irritable, your social interactions inevitably suffer. Consciously applying these software programs for interpersonal communication can mitigate the damage, rebuild trust, and actually reduce your overall stress load by improving your work environment. You protect both your personal well-being and your professional effectiveness.
That seems like a really crucial step, managing the downstream social consequences of your internal state. It prevents the negative cycle from spiraling further outwards, affecting your team and your reputation.
Exactly. And it connects directly back to Richard Rumelt's ideas in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy about building coherent action and exercising focused leadership, even if it's just leadership of yourself in this context. You need to honestly identify the core obstacles, the physiological drain, the mental exhaustion, the specific work pressures, the damaged relationships, and apply disciplined choices to navigate the prolonged stress effectively. You refuse to allow organizational or personal inertia and burnout to take over. You are, in essence, becoming the strategist for your own resilience. Acknowledging, as Rumelt says, that good strategy arises from individual, careful assessment of situations, and that absolutely includes the critical situation of your own mind and body operating under sustained pressure. It's about being strategic with your own limited internal resources, proactively rebuilding and reinforcing your inner fortress brick by careful brick.
Okay, now for perhaps the most baffling and insidious challenge of all, confronting the inner ghost. Imagine this. You're in a high-stakes negotiation, maybe for a huge deal, a dream job, or something personally significant. You're doing great, you're objectively close to achieving a major victory, a real win. Then, you start to notice a disturbing pattern emerging within yourself. You start procrastinating on crucial follow-ups. You make small, uncharacteristic errors in communication. Maybe you start picking unnecessary fights over minor details, jeopardizing the whole thing. It's like a part of you doesn't actually want to win. It feels like Pressfield's resistance, showing up right at the finish line to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. How do you possibly confront this inner ghost using our integrated protocol?
The inner ghost of self-sabotage near the finish line. This is deeply frustrating and often deeply rooted. This ghost is almost certainly, as you suspect, a manifestation of an unmanaged internal state driving subconscious behaviors. It ties back beautifully to the charisma myth's emphasis on internal state dictating external behavior, and it's deeply understood through van der Kolk's lens of embodied trauma, unmet needs, or ingrained limiting beliefs. It might be an unconscious loss aversion, kicking in, perhaps fearing the loss of freedom or the loss of your current identity if you succeed. It could be a fear of the added responsibility, visibility, or expectation that comes with this big win. Or even a deep-seated, often childhood-rooted belief that you don't actually deserve success or that success is somehow dangerous. Whatever the specific root cause, it's manifesting physiologically first, often below the radar of conscious awareness, but subtly shifting your nervous system into a state of unease or threat, which then drives the sabotaging actions.
So, maneuver one, controlling the foundations, isn't about a big, obvious panic attack here, but more about tuning into those really subtle physical cues, those physiological tells that signal this self-sabotaging program is about to run or is already running in the background.
Exactly. The physiological intervention here, maneuver one, is about cultivating acute somatic awareness. You need to become hypersensitive to the subtle body cues that reliably precede or accompany the self-sabotaging behavior. Ask yourself, what does it feel like in my body just before I procrastinate on that important email? Is there a subtle shift in my posture, a slight tightening in my chest or jaw, a change in my breathing pattern, a sudden nervous fidget, or an inexplicable urge to suddenly check social media or grab a snack? Become a detective of your own micro-sensations. These are the early warning signals from your hardware, your nervous system whispering or shouting that something is amiss, that an old program is being triggered. Once you notice a cue, you can use techniques like orienting, which van der Kolk discusses. Consciously look around your physical environment, slowly scanning the room, noticing colors, shapes, objects. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. This simple act pulls your attention out of the internal swirl of anxiety and grounds your nervous system firmly in the present moment, signaling safety. Then, actively use visualization to create a counter state of calm confidence and deservedness. Vividly imagine yourself successfully closing the deal, feeling the positive emotions associated with that win. Again, influence your cocktail of chemicals away from anxiety and towards empowerment. Persuasion's insight on focused attention influencing perceived causality is relevant too. By consciously shifting your attention towards the positive outcomes of winning and away from the anxieties and imagined negative consequences, you can influence your unconscious readiness and willingness to succeed. You're consciously reassuring your primal foundations, your body, that success is safe and actually desirable.
Okay, that's fascinating. So you tune into the physical whispers, ground yourself in the present, and actively cultivate the feeling of successful completion. Once you've started to shift the physiological state with maneuver one, what mental tools do you deploy? How does the conscious citadel engage in maneuver two to confront this slippery, self-sabotaging program directly? This feels like some deep internal detective work and maybe even negotiation.
It truly is. It requires bringing conscious awareness to potentially unconscious drivers. So, maneuver 2 involves asking some tough questions, informed by our software tools. You need to investigate. What ruling principle, as Marcus Aurelius would call it, is actually at play here? What deep-seated belief or fear is driving this sabotage? Is it a fear of the unknown consequences of success? Is it an unspoken objection to winning, as Grant Cardone might frame it, in Sell or Be Sold? Maybe a subconscious belief, echoing Peter Thiel in 0 to 1, that competition is fierce and winning just sets you up for a bigger fall later, making you fear that a win today might lead to a perceived loss tomorrow. You absolutely need to examine men's ruling principles, as Aurelius advises, and in this critical case, rigorously examine your own deep-seated, often hidden assumptions and beliefs about success, failure, and yourself.
So it's about making the subconscious conscious, bringing the ghost out of the shadows, and then challenging its logic, maybe even negotiating with it, using reason and techniques from our sources.
Precisely. You can employ tactical empathy techniques borrowed from Chris Voss and Never Split the Difference, but applied internally. Try mislabeling the emotion or feel to force a correction from your inner self. For example, you might internally acknowledge, okay, it seems like a part of me is terrified of the extra work this victory will bring. Even if that's not quite right, stating it allows the real fear to surface. Maybe the response is no, it's not the work, it's the fear of letting people down. Aha, now you're getting closer to the root. Or use labeling directly, it seems like there's a fear of failure attached to this success. Or it sounds like there is a belief that I don't deserve this. Just naming it non-judgmentally can reduce its power. Then, actively address the potential loss aversion you uncover. anchor the potential negative emotions associated with the perceived losses of success, for example, more pressure, higher expectations, less freedom, by acknowledging them, but then consciously, deliberately frame the victory as an equal gain or greater gain that demonstrably outweighs these potential downsides. List the benefits. Make the win feel psychologically larger than the perceived costs. This also links directly back to understanding what gives you personally a feeling of importance, as Carnegie discussed. If the self-sabotage is somehow fulfilling a hidden need, perhaps the need to stay safe in the familiar, to be the underdog, or to avoid the perceived burdens of the spotlight, then identifying this underlying desire is absolutely key to finding healthier ways to meet it. Sometimes, simply admitting the fear or the sabotaging pattern internally clears the air of guilt and defensiveness, as Carnegie noted about external conflicts, and helps you solve the internal problem. By understanding and reframing the root cause, you can dissolve the inner ghost power and allow yourself to move forward and claim the victory.
Okay, we've gone from the conceptual blueprint of the 2 tiers, run through some intense real-world simulations applying the integrated protocol. Now, how do we make this stick? How do we translate all this deep analysis into something practical, something usable every day? We need to forge the Fortress OS Blueprint v2.0, maybe a simple one-page tool for daily self-mastery and resilience. This is about taking it from theory and occasional intervention to a consistent operational practice.
Exactly. This final phase is all about making integrated self-mastery a daily, repeatable discipline. It's about weaving the awareness of both your primal foundations and your conscious citadel into the fabric of your everyday life. It's about constant calibration, reflection, and adaptation, proactively reinforcing the fortress walls and upgrading your internal operating system every single day, not just waiting for a crisis. Hashtag I.
Okay, first component of this daily OS, the morning calibration protocol. This sounds like your daily system check, maybe before the day even really gets going, combining both the hardware scan and the software initialization.
That's the idea precisely. It sets the tone and prepares your entire integrated system for whatever the day might bring. It helps ensure you start the day operating from within, or at least aware of, your window of tolerance. Your personal checklist should integrate both a physiological and a mental state assessment, drawing directly from our unified theory. First, a quick physiological state check. Ask yourself honestly, what is the state of my nervous system right now? Am I waking up already feeling anxious, rushed, in fight or flight mode? Or do I feel relatively calm and centered? Where am I in relation to my window of tolerance? Am I feeling grounded or already a bit hijacked? This pulls directly from van der Kolk's emphasis on nervous system awareness and the charisma myth's focus on recognizing that internal threat response.
And if you find yourself starting the day already feeling stressed or outside that window, what's the immediate actionable step in this protocol?
The actionable step is immediate, gentle regulation. Acknowledge the physical sensations non-judgmentally. Okay, my chest feels tight this morning. Then actively engage in a few minutes of deep, controlled breathing, focusing on those long exhales to activate the vagal nerve. Or maybe do a brief 1-minute body scan meditation to connect with physical sensations, or a quick visualization focusing on feeling calm, capable, and grounded. This isn't about achieving perfect bliss. It's about consciously nudging your hardware towards a more regulated state, signaling safety to your amygdala, and helping you move into, or at least closer to, your window of tolerance before the day's demands hit. Second, right alongside that, a mental state check. Ask yourself, what Stoic principle or virtue will I intentionally focus on today to guide my interpretations and actions? This comes directly from meditation's emphasis on aligning with your ruling principle and setting clear daily intentions. Aurelius constantly asked himself, what am I rising to do today? Am I making haste to do that which is according to my nature, my rational and social nature?
So it's about proactively setting your mental compass for the day, choosing your software theme, rather than just reacting passively to whatever emails or events wash over you.
Exactly. The actionable step here is to set a clear intention based on a chosen virtue for the day, perhaps patience or courage or kindness or focus, drawing inspiration from meditations. Then maybe mentally rehearse 1 or 2 potential challenges you anticipate facing today. And crucially, prepare your opinion or interpretation in advance. Decide how you will choose to perceive and react to those challenges if they arise, aligning your planned response with your chosen virtue rather than being swept away by immediate emotional or physiological surges when they hit. This is your software preloading its prime directives for the day. Hashtag 22, the crisis response decision tree.
All right, so we've calibrated in the morning. But inevitably, things will still hit the fan during the day. An unexpected crisis, a sudden conflict, overwhelming news, your nervous system starts to flare up. This next tool sounds like your emergency flowchart, your integrated defense protocol for immediate effective action in the moment. This is about preventing a total system meltdown before it gains momentum.
Precisely. This crisis response decision tree always begins with one crucial question, prioritizing the primal foundations, because, as we've established, an unregulated body severely hinders rational thought and good decision-making. So the start point of the flowchart is always, what is the state of my nervous system right now? Am I feeling agitated, shut down, overwhelmed? Where am I on that window of tolerance scale? Again, drawing from the body keeps the score's understanding of physiological states, and the charisma myths focus on internal state awareness. This initial check acknowledges that an agitated body makes effective problem-solving nearly impossible, as your higher cognitive functions, your prefrontal cortex, are likely compromised. Hardware check first.
Okay, makes sense. Prioritize stabilizing the hardware. And then the branching pathways, based on that critical self-assessment. What comes next?
Yes. Then comes the conditional branching. If you recognize you are agitated, feeling emotionally hijacked, overwhelmed, or clearly outside your window of tolerance, either hyper or hypoaroused, your very first step is mandatory physiological regulation. Do not try to think your way out yet. Employ immediate techniques. Rapid controlled breathing, like 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale, or box breathing. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Change your physical posture. Stand up, stretch, walk around. Splash cold water on your face. Use a grounding technique like the 5-4-3-2-1 senses exercise. Do whatever works for you to calm the hardware and bring your nervous system back towards regulation. Once, and only once, that initial physiological state feels even marginally more stable, even just a little calmer, then you proceed down the other branch to logical analysis using your conscious citadel. Here, you deploy your mental software. First, define the thing which is presented to thee in its substance, in its nudity. Meditations. What actually just happened? What are the objective facts, stripped bare of emotional interpretation and catastrophic thinking? Then ask, what is truly in my power right now? What can I influence or control in this immediate situation? And maybe, what are the core feedback loops and delays at play here, as thinking in systems encourages us to consider? What are the systemic dynamics? Critically, you also run your internal antivirus scan. Are there any cognitive biases, like the focusing illusion making this seem bigger than it is, or loss aversion making me overly defensive, influencing my perception right now? Pulling from nudge and never split the difference.
This sounds like a really structured way to cut through the immediate emotional noise, the panic, the potential biases, and actually get to the core truth of the situation, enabling a better response.
That's exactly the goal. It leads to the final step, making a strategic decision. Guided by reason, you ask, as Aurelius did, what does reason demand now? You aim to run to the short way, and the short way is the natural. Accordingly, say and do everything in conformity with the soundest reason. Meditations. This involves choosing coherent action, as Rumelt advocates in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, a response that is logical, aligned with your goals and values, and based on an accurate assessment of the situation, rather than resorting to impulsive, fragmented, biased reactions fueled by a dysregulated system or an overactive, fearful resistance. This systematic approach, hardware check first, then software analysis, ensures that you're responding from a place of relative calm, rationality, and strategic clarity, rather than getting sucked into reactive chaos. #3, the integrated performance log, evening review.
Okay, so we have the morning calibration to set us up and the crisis decision tree for in-the-moment challenges. The final piece of this Daily Fortress OS v2.0 sounds like an evening review, a nightly debrief. This feels crucial for continuous learning, self-correction, and adaptation over time. It's how you refine your internal operating system, strengthen the Fortress walls, and patch the software based on the day's actual performance data.
Exactly. The integrated performance log is your chance for reflective learning. It involves asking yourself maybe 3 key questions in the evening, designed specifically to connect the 2 tiers, body and mind, and drive concrete future improvement based on the day's experiences. Question 1. What specifically triggered my nervous system today? When did I notice myself moving towards the edges of or outside my window of tolerance? This question is directly inspired by this. The body keeps the score's insight into recognizing our internal states and triggers, and also persuasion's understanding of how specific cues or events can capture our attention and significantly influence our state. Purpose. The goal here isn't judgment, but pattern recognition. Identify the specific external events, for example, a particular meeting, a type of criticism, traffic, or internal stimuli, for example, negative self-talk, worrying about the future, that cause noticeable physiological shifts, frustration, anxiety, overwhelm, shutdown, even excessive excitement. You're learning your system's unique vulnerabilities and sensitivities, mapping your personal triggers and how your body responds. Question 2. How did that physiological state affect my conscious decisions, behaviors, and thoughts? This is where you explicitly connect the primal foundations to the conscious citadel, analyzing the downstream impact. Purpose. Reflect honestly. Did that feeling of physiological arousal or shutdown lead to biased thinking? For example, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, as described by Nudge and Kahneman. Did it result in impulsive actions or regrettable words? Did it noticeably increase that familiar resistance from Pressfield, making you avoid important tasks or revert to old patterns? Did you find yourself succumbing to fluff or pursuing unrealistic stretch goals instead of adhering to a sound, good strategy, as Rommelt warns against? This deepens your understanding of your own personal cycle of instability or stability and the critical interplay between your hardware and software. Question 3. Based on today's triggers and responses, what one small habit or specific practice can I build, strengthen, or implement tomorrow to enhance my stability and self-mastery? This comes from the powerful concept of proactive habit building for systemic stability and resilience. It's your planned software update or hardware maintenance for the next day. Purpose. The goal is to proactively develop tiny adjustments or reinforce positive patterns. This could be committing to a specific stoic reflection to counter a recurring bias you noticed. It might be practicing a particular attention management technique from persuasion before challenging tasks. Perhaps it's planning to use a specific communication method from How to Win Friends in a potentially difficult conversation. Maybe it's even using a sales technique on yourself, like those in Sell or Be Sold or the Psychology of Selling, to increase motivation for a task you're resisting. This is all about consciously building coherent action and strategically focusing energy and resources, as Rommelt puts it, towards greater self-mastery, one deliberate integrated habit at a time. This reinforces positive neural pathways and strengthens your physiological regulation over the long haul.
Wow. That evening review feels incredibly powerful. It turns every day, even the difficult ones, into a learning opportunity to strengthen the entire system. It's not just about surviving the day, but actively improving the fortress.
That's the entire point. We've moved beyond just thinking about superficial discipline or willpower. We're talking about deep systemic control and resilience. By understanding and, crucially, actively integrating your primal foundations, your body's hardware, its neurophysics, its physiological responses, illuminated so well by van der Kolk with your conscious citadel, your mind's philosophical operating system like stoicism, your anti-bias awareness, your strategies for overcoming resistance, and your deliberate habit-building tools, you now have a truly comprehensive blueprint. You have the tools not just to understand your inner world, but to actively engineer your inner fortress for true, sustainable self-mastery. It's about building strong, reliable walls on stable, well-maintained foundations.
And that, deeply curious listeners, feels like a genuinely powerful, maybe even life-changing, new way to approach your goals, your challenges, and your inner world. So here's a final thought to leave you with, drawing from Richard Rommelt again. If good strategy arises from individual, careful assessment of situations, what hidden, crucial insights about yourself will you uncover when you consistently start assessing the intricate interplay of your own mind and body? What new levels of performance, resilience, and ultimately self-mastery will you achieve when you truly understand, manage, and integrate your inner hardware and software? Something profound to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.